day, everybody. This is a review of the George R. R. Martin book Sandkings. This is a collection of short stories or novelettes. I believe it are classed as novelettes. I read this whole book. I had no problems with the writing for the most part. My favorite stories were In the House of the Worm, which almost had a sort of like a fantasy adventure. It was a bit like a Time Machine by H.G. Wells. I mean, not that there's a time machine in it, but it was a similar. Well, the Groons, which are in the House of the Worm, are they're a lot like Morlocks. Um, you can see on the cover. The cover illustrates the novel In the House of the Worm. Here's one of the worms. This is a Groon. It has 6 limbs. It's sort of a humanoid. This is the main character in a sort of a very bit of effeminate looking costume, but uh, he wears a badge that's the Greek letter theta, and he's holding a broken lamp. This is a lamp with a glass that's broken on the end, of some variety, and he uses this as a weapon in the book. And this is not a planet. This is actually the sun. This place takes place at a time when the sun is dying. It's going out, and it's has these large black areas on it. Now, Martin has said that he likes to do things science fiction-y. Um, I'm not really sure why the I'm not really sure why the main character here is in such a almost looks like a homoerotic or homosexual costume, uh, skin tight, wearing a sort of dragon hat, but it's sort of like a bit like Mega Man sort of thing. Pink visor. I'm not sure why they made him like that. It could be like just the convention of the covers at the time, but I don't know. I always like to delve into. You know, we have the typeface here, this font, as we call it now, the typeface. Very rounded, stylized, very 1970s like style. I heard that George R. R. Martin, before I ever knew this, George R. R. Martin actually is not named R.R. in the middle. He took that because of J.R.R. Tolkien, which I don't know. I guess you can use anything as your pen name, but merely copying Tolkien is a little bit. I think it's kind of in poor taste, just to do that. It's like me calling myself CS Reese. I mean, pick anything else. I experimented. Uh, because of this, though, I experimented for a time in calling myself DLLL. Three L's. Might as well go three or four L's. Reese as a pen name. Um. So in the House of the Worm was good. The pacing was good. It was well written. I think I read it straight all the way through. Um, the drawbacks for me is that it's there's a little bit of a gross factor with the worms. It is a little bit of a depressing story, and because the society of humans that is left on this planet, we're sort of we're led to believe that it's Earth in the far future. I'm not sure how long. I'll have to check how long it is that the sun will start um, dying, but I don't think I think it's like in a billion years. So in a billion years or more, something like that, I don't think humans will be in a state of frozen evolution for that long. Could be wrong. I know rats, a rat-like animal. Sorry, not rats, but not modern rats, but a rat-like animal. Supposedly, I'm I'm not an expert on the paleontology of this, but the story goes that most people repeat, which is probably not exactly correct. But mammals existed as rats for the Mesozoic during the age of dinosaurs. And that era was much longer than the age of humans, I believe. Like many times longer, 100 times longer. Um, we'll have to check the exact paleontology of that, though. Let's see. Well, of course, the usual fiction reader is not going to ask these questions, but I will. Um, secondly, with the sun having these dark patches, I'm not sure if that's a stage of stellar evolution. In other words, as the sun dies, quote unquote, I'm not sure there's ever a time where it just turns into fiery areas with black parts. You know, in imaginary, which this is, yes, but I'm not sure. I think we understood the stellar evolution by the 1970s. I'm not sure. Of course, I think most people didn't know what it was, and I don't know if they know what it was today. And Martin didn't care. It it's just a little bit interesting because he always makes such a point about saying things like dragons should have two legs because there aren't any animals that have. Well, I think he means mammals because I mean insects have six legs and wings, but there aren't any animals that have wings and 4 feet. Like I guess not arthropods, but mammals or something. Birds. I guess that's what it means. Um, but if you're in make believe, you can do what you know. If this is just supposed to be totally imaginary, which maybe lots of the other parts of it are totally imaginary. It could be whatever you want, or it could be some kind of star that we haven't discovered yet. That's another possibility. Um, and this could also not be Earth. I think there's a lot of hints in the House of Worm that 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 this is not actually Earth, but was some kind of colony that was constructed, and the theta is the emblem of the constructor society of this culture, which has now decayed to the point where they're worshiping. They only occupy the top areas of this mansion, which is an underground mansion. Um, while the grooms and the worms occupy the lower parts, yet again, kind of like the Morlocks. Um, what was really nice about this book is when they first go down into the caverns below where these pretty humans live at the top. They first go down to the caverns, they find this vast chamber that has skylights, and the skylights are all purplish red. I hope it's purplish red. It's probably I'm adding that, but it's a vast chamber with many windows on the ceiling. Um, I found that to be a very compelling image, and I even used a uh, a place like that in some of my books. I was writing a lot of science fiction at the time that I that I read this book. It was a while ago, but I used to be almost entirely a science fiction writer. And I guess I wrote it into Earth. And Earth is this colossal, well, it's not as colossal as some of the books I'm doing now because nothing could be more colossal than the Myriad. But Earth Earth is a really big book that is a huge prequel to Siberia, but it's an alternate universe of Siberia, and it's a tad more science fantasy. Siberia is a tad more in the hard science fiction direction. More at least it's more pure science fiction, although it has the adventure themes. It's kind of like more of a Dune type of deal. There are a tad more fantasy elements in Earth. But I used a large thing like this, and I think I also used an image like this in Green Siberia, which is the sequel to first sequel to Siberia is called Green Siberia, and it's that that book Green Siberia has a lot of cool stuff in it. It's just, I mean, I haven't really worked on the other sequels a ton. Well, I have done some outlining of like the general idea, general concept. But Green Siberia just is chock full with epicness, and it's chock full with cool images and places and all this stuff. I kept adding and adding and adding over a long period of time to that one, and it's really got some cool stuff in it and lots of it. So, anyways, uh, back to Sandkings. Um, there was a story in this collection. I'm not gonna have time to go through every story, but I read this book all the way through. There wasn't a single story that I didn't like, although In the House of the Worm was my favorite one. I remember it being distinctly my favorite one. Um, I think Karen Hall. Karen Hall. It's like I know Martin said that when he was writing science fiction, he did a lot of fantasy in it, and it's obvious. Bitter Blooms. There's a story called Bitter Blooms. This involves kind of like again this cool. He has kind of a cool idea about seasons being longer than we have in real life. Um, we are gonna assume that a planet has some kind of ability to have a tilt that's like that. I'm not sure about the science of that, if that's scientifically feasible. But as I said, you never know. We are far from having discovered and explored everything in our galaxy. The radio signals from our galaxy are merely it's kind of like a dot that we've been able to penetrate with our signals the galaxy. Although we have a lot of devices and telescopes now, and we found tons of planets, and we have almost always never found anything even close to Earth conditions. There are no planets with lots of water and a hard crust, a hard, well, it's a silicon base is what rocks are, and I guess calcium's in that too, but a lot of the Earth crust is silicon dioxide, and that's what most rocks are made out of. We have not really found a planet that has a lot of water and that has a silica based crust. We were thinking, we could find planets that are all water, like an ocean planet. Correct me if I'm wrong. They're finding stuff all the time, so my information and assumptions might be out of date, or it might be that I just don't know about something. But I'd be interested to see if they did find a water planet, but that isn't frozen. There's plant like Europa is surrounded by I think a frozen crust, but I think there's methane in that. I'm not sure about Europa, but I think there's water on it. But it's so cold that nothing can really live there. Um. Anyways, he's got this. That was a big tangent, but he's got this cool idea about seasons being longer than normal, and he used this. Of course, you may know if you know Song of Ice and Fire that he did use this. He uses this as the long winter. And in Westeros, what is the name of that planet? I don't know if the planet even has a name. In Westeros, the planets. The seasons are longer than a year. In winter can be really long. Stuff like that. He had this idea way back in. So Karen Hall in the story of Bitter Blooms is been quite a while since I read this one. Uh, Karen Hall is a very tight society, very harsh society, or something. Uh, is this it? So there's a character that is named. So there's a character in this one that is named Devin, which I always find fascinating when a character has my name. Um, but that's not the point of this story. Oh yeah. Okay, so that isn't the point of this story at all. So the point of this story, Bitter Blooms, this is the one. This is the one I was looking for. The main character is a woman who goes and she finds a spaceship that is, I think, overgrown with vines, and it's off somewhere. And this spaceship, inside the spaceship, is Morgan Le Fay, which you may know is a witch from Camelot and the King Arthur stories. What she is doing on another planet, and she, okay, so the story is about, this story, Bitter Blooms, is about, she takes this girl who was from Karen Hall on this planet, which is a rather austere and kind of Spartan like culture, and she takes her and, sorry, I gotta sneeze. She takes her in the spaceship to other planets and these other places, and it's like this intergalactic world, this society. Some people call this the Thousand Worlds uh, universe. I think it's called the Thousand Worlds universe. Um, she takes her to all these places, and she I think right from the start she wants her as her homosexual lover, or lesbian lover. And eventually she wants to like do her hair exactly the way that Morgan Le Fay does it and all this stuff. And something happens. Either she tricks Morgan, or she doesn't want to be her girlfriend anymore, or her wife, whatever, partner. And they also, during their trip, they go to Avalon, which is a planet that is really cool and is the center of galactic learning. And the galactic registry on her spaceship is from Avalon, although she's like on this other planet. And the girl doesn't want to be a girlfriend anymore, so they go back to the girl's planet. She goes and she becomes an important person in Karen Hall and blah blah blah. Then she gets tired of her life. She goes back, tries to find the spaceship again, which is overgrown by brambles, and it's the middle of the winter, and then she falls asleep. And then the last line is, when she slept, she dreamt of Avalon. Or when she slept, she dreamt of Morgan Le Fay. It almost sounded like she dies when she dies of hypothermia when I assume that it means that she dies of hypothermia and then she has this vision of whatever. But I guess now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it's a happy ending. Maybe she goes back and she finds Morgan Le Fay in her dreams, and it's all like a dream. It's sort of like that whole thing takes place in a dream. Anyway, that's what Bitter Blooms is about. Um, Probably the first story that I've ever seen in about homosexuals. That isn't a Greek story. Certainly, first one in fantasy or science fiction I've really read. I think I could be wrong. Usually, they're just not allowed. We don't. You can't. They don't even talk about it. And when confronted with the fact that he writes about these things, Martin just says, "Well, it's these people." He says in his manner, "Oh, these people. Dude, where's the hat? I I don't have an engineer hat, folks. Sorry, or a captain's hat, whatever the heck it is. Train engineer. Anyway, he goes like this. Well, they exist, so therefore, I don't understand why you went right about. I'm just wondering if like he had some kind of homosexual thoughts or had a relationship at that time, or I just wouldn't assume somebody would write about that unless they actually were gay themselves, or something. Did he write it just because that was a in topic and it was the 70s? I don't know. I know at least the TV show Game of Thrones is littered with minor characters having gay relationships, but I guess maybe Renly Baratheon is the main one I can think about. Um, and his boyfriend Sir Loras. Anyway, so but I mean, I also feel like a lot of fans of that genre feel like a lot of fans of the fantasy genre and maybe science fiction too are I don't want to say conservative, although I would say the 1970s stuff. I think the fans of 70s science fiction or science fiction fan in the 70s maybe were a little bit more liberal. I feel like a lot of them nowadays are a little bit conservative. Like, just seems that way. And I mean, I know that Robert A. Heinlein goes around, and I guess I mean he's his own thing, but I guess you call him a conservative libertarian. I don't even know. Like, I don't even know what to call him. I guess he is. He's not a leftist. I guess if I'm right, I'm not sure if I'm right about him. But anyways, I feel like a lot of people in that genre, a lot of fans of that genre are somewhat conservative. Maybe they're socially conservative, but I think they are also there's a lot of maybe I don't want to say they're homophobic, but I feel like there is a certain homophobic atmosphere or a shared thing where to the and I mean kind of like to the extent of where there are gay scenes in that show or in books. It's like I think fans of it, if they weren't actually gay themselves, a lot of times would not read or not want to read a story about that. So I'm just wondering, like, did he? I don't know. Also makes me wonder. And also another one I wondered about that was Frank Herbert because he makes the villain, the Baron Harkonnen. I'm pretty sure he makes him gay, but I think he's also kind of like a pedophile. But it's been a long time since I read Dune and didn't watch the movie, and the movie is different than the book, so I don't want to judge it from the movie. Um, it's like there's what sort of getting at is there's almost like this suppressed gay undertone, or where there's a gay subtone that a sub thread that's going on, but it's like not in the main stories. I'm just wondering why that is. Um, so anyway, uh, Sandkings, which is the story which this is named after, is is about. Well, I like this one too. Maybe it's not my favorite of them, but Sandkings is about. Sandkings is about this guy who buys a bunch of pets that are like ants, and there's four castles that they build, and the fourth castle looks really kind of decrepit and small. I think they're like the alpha, beta, gamma, or maybe their colors, and they do little portraits of the guy on their castle, and then he decides that he's going to stop feeding them, which is advised against by the pet shop that he gets it from. And then, anyway, spoilers here. I guess I have to say, stop watching the video if you don't want to know what the story is. Should have said that before, but whatever. So he he stops feeding them, and then they start fighting like a war, and then he has all his friends over, and they have a party, and they like watching this war, and then I think it continues this, but they break out, and then they start changing, metamorphosizing into bigger forms, and and he goes to the pet shop. In the pet shop, there's like an eerie voice from the back room of something that he can't really see, but it's actually an adult Sand King. These little ants are called Sand Kings, and the adult Sand King says, well, these were the larval or nymph form of our species, but they are not the final form, and because you did not feed them, they are metamorphosizing faster, and they will evolve faster until their final form. And they break out, and they try and kill them, and they're all over the place. They're building castles all over the place. There was an Outer Limits adaptation of this, which does not take place in the future, does not take place in the intergalactic society that this story takes place in his Thousand Worlds, I guess it's called, universe. There was a Outer Limits adaptation that takes place on Earth, and these little creatures are from Mars, which was nowhere near as cool as this story. Don't think that it's as boring as that adaptation, because it's not. It's way more interesting. So, but they're all over the place. They're trying to kill him. They're all over his yard. They're building their castles outside. I think they're getting bigger. I'm not sure. And the one tribe, which is always smaller and whatever, kind of disappears, and then everything's a disaster and blah blah blah, and then he escapes or whatever from his house, which is they're trying to tear him limb from limb. He escapes from his house, and then what happens is he thinks that he's gotten away, and he climbs another ridge, and he's trying to walk away from his home, and they've like torn apart his flying car or flying machine, whatever it is they used to get around, and he goes off, and he's getting away from his house, and he's like relieved or whatever that he survived, and he crosses another bridge, and then all of a sudden he sees a house, and he goes in there, and there's these people in there, but I guess then it's revealed that these people are actually the evolving state, or they're the state that the missing tribe of ants or Sandkings has turned into these people. And then I guess he dies because they kill him. It was an interesting story, you know. Yet again, kind of bloody, lots of macabre though, which is not my thing. But fascinating story, at least for one read. Um, there's other stuff in here. It takes place in mostly in his Thousand Worlds universe. There's one about a stone. It's called the Stone City. It's about um, this planet where some guys are trapped in this big labyrinthine city of stones. Kind of like reminds me of Parrot Nessie by what's her name, Susanna Clark, I think. That one was okay. Kind of felt like the ending was a little inconclusive. He ends up in the basement of everything, and all these aliens, different alien races, are walking around and flying around in the basement areas. A little bit of an oppressive air in there, kind of like you're trapped in something, trapped in a maze, trapped in a wall. I'm just wondering, why can't Martin? A lot of people are going to say, well, we're fans of horror and we're fans of this genre. We want that. How dare you say it should be any different? But as for me, and I am not a fan of that genre too much. I did, I do enjoy Edgar Allan Poe though, in particular. I think Poe is always. I like Edgar Allan Poe a lot. He's never disappointed me. I should do a video on some of his books, but I'm not a fan of darker stuff usually. So I'm just wondering, why can't George R. R. Martin write something that I and I don't mean be sappy and super cheerleader. I'm just wondering, like, what kind of hope is he giving us? What kind of advice? What kind of direction? What kind of message is he sending? Which is a positive message. I know that teachings or wisdom can come through showing the mistakes of all these people and their crimes and how they're punished, and how excesses lead to vanity, which leads to disaster. Obviously, a key. It's obviously a key theme in the Sand Kings itself story, which is the last story in this book. And I guess that in the House of the Worm, you have a noble hero who conquers and he makes good. I think all of his companions die. I think there's a lot of gore and gruesome scenes in it. Like, there's just also stuff like Meatbringer, which it's like these people who are pretty that live in the top mansions of this underground construction. They they like eating meat, and they want to eat a groon. And it's just a little bit like, well, not only I think it's just kind of like in poor taste. I don't need to see that, and I don't need and their society worships like this half worm guy who is like almost like lobotomized because he's like has to turn into a man worm. And I'm just thinking, like, Frank must have gotten this from Frank Herbert. I would bet you $1. I know. I'll bet you $10 that he got this from Frank Herbert and not the other way around, meaning God Emperor of Dune. Um, but you see, in God Emperor of Dune, the man worm is a super powerful entity, and he's quite a character, quite interesting. And in this story, the man worm is totally like lame. It's like he gets lobotomized and or something, and they still worship him. So I'm just like, what? What is that? Like I feel like that's a little lame. Another thing with Martin along this, while we're on this kind of little line of attack or criticism, another thing is, let's take one of my favorite episodes from Song of Ice and Fire is when Daenerys goes into it's the house of, well, house of the worm, house of, here we go, the house of the undying ones, and that's actually in similar in flavor to in the house of the worm. I can see it's the same writer, you know, but even just the episode is similar. So in the house, there's all these buildings that are decrepit, even like the cult of the faceless ones in Bravos. There's like this Venetian. I always think of Venice. It's like this Venetian quality to it, where there's a house and it's decadent and it's blah blah blah, and it's bad things are happening in there. Kind of like the Cask of Amontillado. Well, not like the Cask of Amontillado, but you know, like the romance of this like decadent city that has these hidden places that has cults in them and all this stuff. So just that atmosphere, sort of Venetian atmosphere. So it's actually quite nice, but I'm not sure if Martin always executes it like the way that I would. So you take that episode with the Undying Ones, and I would have made it a little different than that. They just drink the juice of the leaves of the black trees. They have these blue leaves, blue purple. I guess they're blue purple, but they're blue leaves. The Undying Ones are all blue, and they're like these ghoulish beings that are all blue with like blackish blue nails, and you know, they're actually like undead, but they're the warlocks, and they present themselves magically in the other room, the big hall. They show themselves as all these like beautiful and powerful looking normal wizards with the pointed hats and all this power stuff. But you're supposed to ignore that, and then you go into this ghoulish room, and I think that if I was to rewrite that part, I would have not just made them destroyed. I guess he does this more with Ice and Fire, but I would have just made them destroyed. And there's like a blue heart floating in the middle of them. I don't know, man. I think I can figure out a little bit more of an interesting story to involve the warlocks in, rather than just being like the undying ones are all just killed. Maybe I would have made their drink, which is called Shade of the Evening, a fermented berry from the tree, but I guess it doesn't. He does this again with the werewood trees, like you have to drink some. I think Brandon Stark drinks some potion from a werewood tree. But I just don't get like, just the heavy, it's kind of, it seems heavy handed to me. That's it. That's the word. Heavy handed. So they don't all need to die. I mean, they could have been like, say, an interesting. antagonists or villains in the rest of the series, or anything. Maybe maybe Daenerys becomes one of them. That would have been more interesting than having her little dragon just disintegrate them. Maybe we could get some, like, get to know them. Maybe they're really interesting. They had really interesting past lives. They take really interesting trips into other planes of existence, other universes. They could all have distinct personalities. They could all have names. They could all have, we could all we could get into their past lives. And all these things, of course, you don't think about when you're writing. So I mean, it's fair, of course, to mention that maybe he just didn't think of that at the time, and that's just the way it is. But it does seem a bit heavy-handed, perhaps, that he would just kill them all. But like I said, you never know. Maybe he just didn't come up, didn't think of that. But I think that would be more interesting. Now that I've had that idea and I could rewrite it like that, I think that would make A Song of Ice and Fire a lot more interesting. And part of it is that Martin, I think what Martin is doing with that series is he's really underwriting the magic. So he says that, well, if you look at J.R.R. Tolkien, the magic isn't really strong. And sure, I mean, Gandalf, but it's not because they don't have it powerful magic. Gandalf just doesn't use it. Because when Gandalf falls and he falls down and he's fighting the Balrog and he meets the nameless beings. Well, isn't this interesting? Faceless man, nameless beings. He meets the nameless beings in the middle of the earth that not even blah blah blah. Some people even call them like Lovecraftian beings that not even Sauron knows about or whatever. Which, since Sauron and Melkor were Maya and Valars, I'm not sure how they don't know about anything. They were around for the creation of the world. How do they just not know? Um, it's kind of like Tom Bombadil, where he says that he's the oldest and he's been here even before the hills and the trees, and you're just like, what is he, God? I mean, it sounds like he's a Luvatar, really. But he doesn't take any responsibility for the ring when the ring comes to him. If he was good, he would be like, "Oh, well, I'll take it because you know what? It has no effect on me, and I'll keep it forever, and I'll help in this quest, and blah blah blah." And then he doesn't. He doesn't have any responsibility. That doesn't make sense to me either. Anyway, so Gandalf kind of walks in these other planes, and he can walk in other planes of existence, and he can disappear, and he even the fact that he was reborn is self resurrection is definitely an extremely advanced magical power, and it's not clear how his magic differs from spiritual power or just like the fact that he's a Maiar spirit. The fact that his magic and his Maiar spirit powers have no there's no difference between clerical or the powers of religious belief and magic in Tolkien. Isn't that distinction made very clearly? Except for the fact that he's a wizard, so you expect there's magic. But it's not like Dungeons and Dragons. It's sort of you can't tell where one ends and one begins. So it seems like Martin is trying to dial down the magic in his fantasy, and he's like, well, if these warlocks really had these kind of powers, they could go to other planes of existence and blah blah blah, then there wouldn't be any kings. They'd be the king. I don't know if that's true, but I mean that's what he said. Well, anyway, this video has gone on very long, and it's time to wrap it up.